Life is like a random walk. So it's not completely random, but you sort of head in a certain direction. I have no idea where life might have led me. Some time ago, there was an incident on the space station which sort of created a lot of, set off a huge vibration through the station. I'm all for understanding, the planetary system, having a Hubble, having James Webb, all this is great. Good decisions come from experience.
Hello everyone. Thank you for joining in on this video. So today we have a very special guest with us. We have Miss Sujatha Sugavanam. Miss Sujatha is a seasoned engineering expert with a strong background in aerospace engineering. She graduated with a degree in mechanical engineering from BITS Pilani in 1984 and earned her Ph.D. in the field from the University of Florida. With nearly 2 decades of experience at Boeing, she made notable contributions to the Artemis program. Moreover, she has been involved in significant projects, including the International Space Station for Boeing and NASA's Johnson Space Flight Center. So welcome, ma'am, to this podcast. Thank you for giving your time to us. How have you been? How are you doing?
I'm doing well, and thank you for having me.
It's absolutely an honor to have you as a guest on our podcast. So firstly, I would like you to please provide a brief overview of your professional background.
Okay. Well, to give you a brief overview, like you said, I graduated from Pilani in 1984. And towards the end of my time there, I did my practice school at the National Aeronautical Laboratory. And then for a while, I spent some time at the Indian Institute of Science. And it was at that point I met a mentor who was a very significant force in my life. He is the one who encouraged me to apply to graduate school. And so I came to the US, I did my master's, and I did my Ph.D. And then I worked first in the aircraft industry. I worked for Cessna Aircraft, which makes business jets. So there I worked on a variety of stuff. Basically, the major project I worked on was a quiet fuselage design problem, which we worked in conjunction with the Naval Research Labs in Washington, D.C., because they had a lot of experience with sound propagating in submarines. So we were transitioning that knowledge to the aircraft industry. And so it was just it was a pretty complicated finite element problem. Basically, we had rotor dynamics because it's basically the engine noise that propagates through the cabin. And so it was also a fluid structure interaction problem because you have the frame of the aircraft, which is the structure, and then you have the internal cabin area, which is the fluid interacting with it. So that was a major project. In addition to that, I worked on simulation of landing gear loads, aircraft cabin noise using boundary element methods, both direct and indirect, wing loads, just a variety of, and more importantly, perhaps ground vibration tests, where you sort of put the aircraft on bungees, suspended to simulate like a free condition, and then you test for the major structural modes of the aircraft. Then in 2004, we had the Columbia disaster, and or rather, before that, we'd had the Columbia disaster, and in 2004, we were gearing up for return to flight. And so it was at that point that I joined Boeing. And then, so it was a transition from aircraft now to the space program. But the way I made the transition was for return to flight, we had to generate descent loads for the space shuttle. And so it was very similar to aircraft loads. So that's how I started working shuttle descent loads. And then because of the Columbia disaster, as you might remember, some of you may recall, it resulted from a giant piece of foam that fell off the tank and impacted the wing leading edge of the orbiter. So the second project that I worked in addition to the descent loads at that time was we had, for return to flight, the orbiter had been instrumented with lots of accelerometers on the wing leading edge to monitor any impact from any foam. But then, when you put an accelerometer on the leading edge, it's going to pick up everything. It picks up the main engine ignition, the solid rocket boosters, igniting and falling off and everything. And so in the middle of this, you had to somehow figure out whether there was any impact from foam or any other debris. So that was another interesting problem which we worked on. In addition to that, I participated in a lot of, every time the orbiter would come back and land, we would take out the control surfaces, the body flap, the wing flaps, and check them for any structural damage, which was again on the testing side of the house. So I do both test and analysis, so that's interesting. So I straddle both sides. And then worked on fatigue life of the space shuttle main engines because they had been instrumented and we had gotten a lot of data. So we wanted to validate that against the life predictions that were made when the shuttle was designed. So worked a bunch of stuff like that. Then I transitioned to the International Space Station. That was about, I think, 2007, 2008 timeframe. And there, one of the major things we had to do was to launch what we call ORUs. ORUs are orbital replacement unit. It's just anything. It may be a pump, it may be a tank, it may be some kind of experiment, some kind of article on which you are doing experiments. So, but basically, whatever it is you're transporting up to orbit has to be able to withstand the rigors of the launch environment. And so with this in mind, what we did was we tested a whole bunch of foams. And as you know, foam is a viscoelastic material. So, you have it has nonlinear stress strain behavior and things like that. So how do you package articles in foam and predict whether it is going to withstand this rigorous launch vibration environment? So that was one of the problems. In addition to that, again, I've done a lot of modal correlation on the International Space Station. Then transitioned to the Artemis program, where we did the modal test on the core stage of the rocket. And now, after that, we had a hot fire test in which, the rocket is just held down and you fire the engines for 8 minutes. So again, you look at the data and see whether your structural modes are where you think they should be from the modal test. Does the modal test agree with the green run hot fire test? And then finally, of course, we had the test flight, and we had test data. And then now we are, doing model changes, Block 1B, core stage 4, and things like that. In addition to that, I also had another very interesting project a couple of years ago where I did some consulted on a project for the Dreamliner aircraft. They were having some difficulty certifying that aircraft for flammability reduction in the fuel tanks. And they had a process that was very tedious and very long, and it was taking them about a week to do the validation, and it was taking them another week to sort of simulate all these flights. They basically simulate numerous flights of, takeoff, landing, and stuff, and monitor the temperature in the fuel tanks, the oxygen concentration and stuff, and this helps them certify for flammability. So I was able to step in and reduce their process from 1 week to under an hour, which was very nice. And I felt very happy about that I was able to reach across the enterprise and work on something quite different from what I normally do, and still help out in a meaningful way. So it's been a very interesting time. Yeah.
Absolutely, ma'am. This sounds really very interesting and fascinating. And I would like to discuss a little bit about the Columbia disaster. But before that, I would like to understand from you that how did you figure out that this is an industry that you would eventually like to go into and work at? So you did you did your bachelor's from BITS Pilani, then you did your PhD, you entered into the aerospace industry. So was it something that you had always wanted to do, or you figured it out over the journey, over the years? How did that happen?
It's a mix of both, because, like I like to say, life is like a random walk. So it's not completely random, but you sort of head in a certain direction. You don't always end up exactly where you intended to, but you're probably somewhere in the ballpark. So when I did my PhD, I was very keen on being an academic, really. I wanted to be a professor. Unfortunately, that didn't work out because my PhD was a bit of a rough ride. I had to change advisors, change problems. I didn't have funding for a while. And so with all that, I ended up going into the aircraft industry. But the other thing was, one of my fellow graduate students was with the space program, and he was instrumental in bringing me to Boeing. Okay.
Also, ma'am, as you mentioned that you made a very interesting point that the life is kind of very random, but still it's not completely randomness. You
right.
eventually end up.
It is. It's a biased random walk. So you give it the bias with your intentionality and with your motivation and whatever your personal preferences are. So that gives it the bias. But about that bias, there is a certain amount of randomness. And so I would call it a biased random walk.
That's an amazing phrase. So how would you suggest people should plan their future, given that there is this biased randomness involved? Because we are not sure whether what we have planned would eventually happen or not. So how one should plan the future?
Well, one should always have goals, and one plans, but as they say, the best made plans of mice and men. Plans don't always turn out the way we intended 100%, but if we get there 80, 85, I think you're doing pretty good. And for that, I think it takes first, you need to be very clear what your goals are. Two, you need focus, and you need to really dedicate yourself to the goal. But then, life happens. You could have an illness, a family member could have some difficulty, and you may have to move off course to help out or be there for them. So many things happen. You could have some kind of a financial setback. You could have a relationship setback. There's all these things going on in the background, but you still sort of keep your course to the extent you can and sort of keep your goals. And that's where you end up. And then there is providence too. Sometimes you just meet somebody, like in my case, my mentor completely changed the course of my life. If I hadn't met him, I have no idea where life might have led me. But he's the one who said, no, you are going to grad school. And I said, how am I going to do it? I don't even have the money to write my GRE and TOEFL and all that. He said, don't worry about that. That'll happen. And so, and the fact that somebody had so much faith in me, I think gave me a lot of courage and strength to keep going, especially when things got dark. Because when things got really dark, like I said, briefly alluded to on my PhD program, what I told myself is, well, Dr. Valluri believed in me. I can't let him down. I cannot let him down. And that kept me going through the rough patches.
Got it. This is very interesting, ma'am. I would like to come back to this.
For my part, I would like to that way believe in somebody so that if that helps them hold on to their goals, I hope I can do that for somebody, pass it on.
Wow, that is amazing. Right. Okay, so ma'am, we'll come to this discussion later in this conversation. I have noted down a couple of points from this. But as the next question, let's delve deeper into your current role. So could you please walk us briefly through your specific responsibilities and projects that you are currently engaged with?
Like I said, I currently am sharing my time between the Artemis program and the International Space Station program, which is my primary assigned role, is on the ISS program. Here, it's mostly sustaining engineering. What I do is whenever there's some kind of a major issue, on the loads side, I troubleshoot for them, try to improve existing loads prediction processes. Another thing I do is, for people who work in finite elements, they're familiar with this. You have sort of standard solution packages. You can do a standard static solution or a standard dynamic problem or a standard vibration problem. But sometimes you have to tailor these solution sequences to something that's very specific to your needs. So to do this, we have what we call direct matrix abstraction programs, which are modifications of these solution sequences. And so it takes a little bit of effort. So I do some of that. Basically, I sort of consult on any difficult loads problem that comes up on the space station. Then on the Artemis side, like I said, I got into that to support the modal test on the core stage of the rocket. And then we did the green run hot fire test. And then we did the test flight. And now we are getting ready for a manned flight or a woman, the first woman on the moon flight, which is why it's not Apollo and it's Artemis. who's the twin, who's Apollo's twin sister. And she's also the goddess of the moon, by the way. Okay. So I'm supporting that. And, now we are building, or rather we validated the model for course stage 2, which is the second flight. And then we're also in the process of validating course stage 4, which is another upcoming flight. So that's kind of my role on the Artemis program. And and then, sometimes something interesting like, I'm hoping something more interesting like Dreamliner will pop up and I can contribute in some way. Because it's always nice to work on something completely different from what you normally do. I find that very appealing.
Got it. So, ma'am, what is it about your work that you find the most fulfilling and rewarding?
Well, like I said, working on something completely new and being able to contribute. One of the other interesting projects I worked on was some time ago, there was an incident on the space station which sort of created a lot of, set off a huge vibration through the station. And we were concerned about its impact, on using up the fatigue life of the station. And so we were trying to identify the kind of pulse strain that triggered that response. And to do that, it was something somebody else was working on. They made a presentation, and so I just stepped in and used this genetic algorithm tool, and I was able to identify a possible pulse strain that could have triggered it. And that was kind of interesting because, again, it was using something I don't always work on. It was something new. So I like something like that. That's a little, the regular humdrum doesn't appeal to me, but something different, something new, and being able to analyze it and contribute in a small way, that's very gratifying.
Okay, got it. I can totally resonate with this thought. So recently I was listening to a podcast and there was this phrase called positive unpredictability. So the guest was trying to explain how the advent of any positive unpredictability in career or life or in different aspects can add a different meaning or a different excitement to it. So just as you mentioned, any new thing that comes our way, any unique thing or a new challenge, it eventually adds up to the daily excitement, the fulfillment, as you mentioned very rightly.
That you learn because it sort of expands your mind in some way. Start thinking in different ways, and I find that appealing. Yeah.
Right. Also, ma'am, so one thing that I find myself struggling with is that in the pursuit of doing something new every time, it becomes really hard to do things that are monotonous, but they are very important and we need to do them, to build that discipline. So how do you kind of balance between those discipline kind of things which are boring, but yet they are important, as well as doing the new things?
Well, the way I think about it is, there is sort of a core theme to what you're doing. And then each of these new things that you do is sort of a sidebar, so to speak. For instance, if I take my personal career, there is a theme. There was, on the aircraft side, I worked on ground vibration tests. Then when I came to the shuttle program, we did model test on all the control surfaces, the body flap, the ailerons, the, wing surfaces of the orbiter. So again, that was model correlation. And then when I moved to the space station, again, we were doing model correlation of the space station. And then again, on the Artemis program, it was a model test and we were identifying the major modes. And so there is this constant theme of the major structural modes of one vehicle or another. It's just that the vehicle changes, the method that you're using to identify the modes changes, but there is a common thread. And then in addition to that, I do all this, landing gear or aircraft noise or, fatigue life of the main engine or things like that. So there is sort of a steady central theme, but then there are these little diversions which kind of make life interesting. That's kind of how I look.
Absolutely, absolutely, ma'am. Also, ma'am, I have heard, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that there have been and there are usually a lot of new developments and advancements in the space industry in general as well. So how do you ensure that you are staying relevant with the new advancements and you get to know the recent advancements and technological developments in the field so that you don't become redundant, for the lack of a better word, over time?
In our space, it works a little differently. Because a lot of what we do is ITAR regulated or EAR regulated. There's these are Department of Commerce or Department of Defense guidelines on what can be divulged and what may not be divulged and things like that. So unlike the academic space, we don't have the freedom to go to a conference and explain everything that we do, because and initially when I transitioned from the university, I used to find this a little restrictive, the change from the academic mindset to the industrial mindset. But, here I learn by, trying to keep abreast with new changes to the different software that I use, learning new skills, working on different problems, different programs. So that is how the diversity comes in. But at the same time, if you take model correlation or these structural dynamics, these are sort of fairly well-established problems, well understood problems. Sometimes we have very world-renowned experts who come and give presentations at places like the Johnson Space Center. Like we had Evans come and talk about, joints and modeling them and stuff like that. So when I have the opportunity, I do go and try to learn what I can from these very senior people. So that's useful.
Got it. This is amazing, ma'am. Also, these days I see, especially in US and also to some extent in India, that there are a lot of commercial space ventures coming up. So how do you see their future, especially from a space exploration point of view?
Well, yeah, now there's a lot of this. SpaceX, for instance, has been doing a pretty impressive job. And there are a lot of other players also. And I don't know, it's different, but what I fear is that with all this, we are going to generate so much orbital debris and stuff. We're going to choke up space like we're choking up the rivers and oceans or whatever. I mean, I'm all for, monitoring the weather, monitoring the atmosphere, everything from space. There are a lot of positive things to do. But then at the same time, do we just want to keep building recreational habitat for millionaires to go and, spend 2 days in space and, make it choke up the place with orbital debris like we've done with the oceans and the rivers? I don't know. I'm a little skeptical about that, really.
Okay. And ma'am, how does NASA as an organization in particular see such new commercial space ventures? So, for example, SpaceX is doing a lot of work in space. So, does NASA see it? And I would like to know your opinion. Does NASA see it as a competitor because the other countries which might have approached NASA for launching of some satellite, etc., might now be approaching SpaceX or other private players?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of them. There's Axiom, there's Sierra Nevada. There's a lot of players in the commercial space, and I think NASA is very positive about it. I think they want to go that route, and so yeah, I think it's something they're very keen on doing.
Okay, so they don't apparently see them as competitors and people who will take their market share, so to speak.
No, I think, they are always looking to collaborate. I think even more recently, I read about the Indo-US space initiative that was signed off and things like that. So, I think collaboration is always good. I mean, the space station is a collaboration with so many other space agencies. So,
right.
I think that's a very positive thing.
Okay, got it, ma'am. Okay, ma'am. So if you were to start your career, let's say in the space industry, anew, so what steps would you take? Like, let's start from the very beginning. What would you do in the first step?
Oh my God. That's a difficult question because, when I started at the National Aeronautical Laboratory, when I was doing my practice school, I was actually in fluid mechanics.
Oh,
I was not structures or structural dynamics. So that's why I said it's a bit of a biased random walk. It's it's sort of, because life is not so like, I'm here and this is where I want to go, and so this is the optimal path I'm going to take. You may have that in mind, but something comes and throws you off kilter. You may you may want to go to a particular university somewhere. You may not get a visa. You may get admission. You may not find an assistantship or funding. So I don't know that, at least in my life, it has not been so deterministic and so laid out. It's sort of, you head in a general direction and you go with the flow, and it's like this, it's sort of, if you're in a room, you don't have an infinite number of doors open to you. You probably have 2 or 3 doors from the room, and it is your motivation and your preferences that lead you to pick one particular door. So, your life as a series of rooms that you transition through, and a series of doors that you're opening. So that's how I look.
That's an amazing analogy. So, but is there something you think you could have done differently?
I could have done differently. That's kind of hard to say, because so much of that is personality also. I mean, there have been decisions that I have double guessed in hindsight. But, life is more than just a career. It is sort of being there for the people who matter to you, being there for your family and taking time away when you need to. And so it's a balance. So I don't know that if I had been more completely career focused, whether that would have made me happier as a person or been more true to my nature. That I do not know.
Got it.
I find that, I don't know.
And ma'am, was there any particular thing that you were trying to optimize throughout your career, or maybe in the initial few years? So, for example, many people try to optimize for, let's say, their portfolio. So let's say they want to go and join and work in MNCs or big companies so that their portfolio develops in certain way. Some people want to optimize for money, for finances, so that they can go and do a very expensive master's program abroad. So was there any particular thing you have always been trying to optimize for or had been trying to optimize for?
Yes. One is I was never focused on money, but I wanted financial independence.
Okay.
And I also wanted to study, and I wanted to do an excellence at what I was doing was important to me. And I think those were two motivating factors. One was the independence, and the other was the technical proficiency and being good at what I do, being respected for what I do. Those are important to me.
Got it. And ma'am, could you please elaborate on financial independence? What does the term exactly mean for you? Like, was there any particular amount in your mind that when I will touch this mark, I will be financially independent, or how does basically?
No. And it meant standing on my own 2 feet and sort of having the liberty to make decisions and to, in some ways, decide the course of my life to the extent anyone can. I mean, we all think we decide the course of our lives. We don't, because we are so impacted by externalities. But within the framework, you sort of want to be able to hold to your core beliefs and values. And that was more the thing. It was not a financial number or anything. For many years, I was just a poor grad student. So it wasn't the monetary aspect of it ever.
Got it. Also, the financial independence, or as you mentioned, being able to stand on your own feet, I think that also gives us a freedom to live life in our own ways, to make choices that we really want to make and not be governed by the circumstances.
Right. And it also gives you a certain confidence and an awareness of the world. And I think those are important.
Correct. Also, ma'am, you mentioned a very important point that about relationships. So I see that BITSians in general are very hardworking people. And like you might have heard of the hustle culture that's very prominent, especially in India, since for the last couple of years. And people have been working for 10, 12 hours, 14, 15 hours even on a daily basis. And that's really something that will help them get ahead in their career, in financial aspect, in maybe building their portfolio. But I think it also has a negative effect to some extent on the relationships, because ultimately we only have 24 hours. So how,
absolutely,
what is your opinion on how one can balance personal relationships along with work, so to speak, work-life balance? And should one even try to strive for work-life balance in the initial years when there is a lot of learning involved and a lot of new things coming?
I know it's very hard because I hear what you're saying. That is in your early years, you're sort of laying out your path and learning all the skills and sort of establishing yourself. And you need to sort of devote yourself to that. But that devoting yourself to that comes at the expense of other things. But I think even so, I would say, I would not encourage anybody to do 10, 12 hours to the extent that they can. I know sometimes it's not a choice. You know, you may be in a situation where it's imposed upon you. I have to say I'm very fortunate that, you know, I work, from 8 to 5, and then I'm home and I don't work weekends most of the time. I mean, I may be sort of mulling a problem over in my mind if it's a particularly tricky problem, but I don't necessarily go in on weekends and things like that. And I'm very fortunate that I have a very short commute, so I don't waste time commuting. And
Wow.
I know if you live in a big metropolis, that may not be an option. Many people have an
Right.
hour, 2 hour commute. And if you do
Correct.
2 hours a day and integral DT, that's a very large number of hours in your life that is going to just commuting. And so, to the extent possible, perhaps you try to trim down on these time costs to the extent that you can. But then, like I said, what do you do if you're in a place like Bangalore where the traffic is heavy and you, for other reasons, have to live in one corner of the city but work at a different corner of the city? You may sort of not have too much choice unless you move house or something like that. So,
Right.
yeah, but I would say at least think of the integral DT costs and try to minimize them.
Correct. Absolutely, totally agree with you, ma'am. So I'm coming back to the space industry. So looking ahead, where do you envision the future of the industry in general and the Indian space industry in particular, especially after the success of Chandrayaan 3?
Oh, I think that was a huge feather in the cap. I know that they have another one that is going to,
The
I forget
sun.
the, that's going,
It's called
the
Aditya,
sun,
if I'm not wrong.
studying the solar corona and things like
Yeah.
that. They have a project for that. I think it's great. I think ISRO has been one of the star programs in the Indian scientific universe. They always had an edge over the rest, and I think it's fantastic. And I know now there are a lot of commercial ventures coming up also. I don't know how that will play out, but I just hope, just like I said, with here in the US, I'm all for understanding, the planetary system, having a Hubble, having James Webb, all this is great. Landsat is great. GOES is great. But do we want to fill space with just numerous satellites just for making somebody happy? I don't know about that.
Right.
I think to the extent that it meaningfully broadens the understanding of the universe, I'm all for it.
Right. And what you said makes a lot of sense. So, is NASA and other space agencies really working on this issue? Like, is this a real concern that there is a lot of debris and other things out in the space, or this is not at all an issue?
MMOD, micrometeorite orbital debris, is a major concern. What was it? They recently destroyed something in orbit, and it sort of populated the entire place with debris. Now, that's a hazard for every other orbiting vehicle. And it's particularly concerning for people on the space station because, we have humans in space there. So I think it is something that bothers me that, there's not regulation of that, and that people can just go blow up a satellite, and then you have all this stuff floating around, and it can impact people. That's
so true.
Right. So I think we need to be a little more conscious about that. That's all. Yeah.
Right. Okay, ma'am. So we are almost at the end of the conversation. So if one last question for you for today is, if you had to encapsulate your entire journey in the space industry, maybe we can start your journey from BITS till date. So if you had to encapsulate your entire journey in just one word, so what would that word be?
Oh, interesting. Very interesting. I mean, when I was at BITS, I might never have imagined that I would be working on the Artemis program. And I am. And, so I kind of like, sometimes I look back and say, how did I get here? This has been an interesting ride. Yeah.
Hmm. So what were your aspirations when you were at BITS, or maybe when you were very small in school? What did you want to become at that point in time?
I think by the time I was in high school, I knew I wanted to be an engineer. Actually,
Okay.
I was on the fence. To be honest, I wanted to keep both um, med school and engineering open to myself in high school.
Okay.
But when I had to go into the biology lab and dissect a frog, that kind of just made the decision. I said, I can't do this. There's no way I can stick my hand into a sack and pull out a live frog.
Yeah.
So I hightailed it out of the lab, and then I signed up for engineering drawing, and that kind of made the decision for me.
Got it. Very interesting.
So sometimes it's as simple as that, your revulsion
Right.
of something.
Yeah. Okay, ma'am. So as a last question, I would like to know from you your pieces, your final insights or pieces of advice for individuals, especially BITSians who aspire to work in the space industry. But before that, I would like to double click on the topic of Columbia disaster that you mentioned. So recently, I was reading
Mm-hmm.
a book, and there was a very interesting quote in that, which said that risk
Mm-hmm.
is what you don't see. So, and I think most of the
Mm-hmm.
disasters, and if even if we talk about the financial disasters in terms of the Great Depression or the 2008 crisis, all of them came when nobody was seeing it. Nobody expected them to come. So, could you please elaborate what Columbia disaster exactly was, and was it totally unexpected, or there was some, kind of reservations around that? How did that happen?
No, there is the Accident Investment Board. There was the Columbia Accident Investment Investigation Board, and they came up with a report. And yeah, I think there were some people who probably noted what happened and thought it should be investigated and stuff like that. But to be fair, when you have a big program like this, you are balancing so many priorities. There is a
Right.
schedule and things you want to get done, and you have people to answer to.
Hmm.
So some voices get suppressed,
Hmm.
and it's very unfortunate that
Right.
sometimes that comes to hurt us. And like you said, um, in hindsight, it's 2020, but sadly, we humans don't have 2020 foresight. It's the same
Right.
with your career.
Right.
You don't know where you're headed. You sort of have a
Correct.
general idea, a general direction you want to go in. But then there's all these distractions and obstructions or other doors that open, which sort of veer you off to a slightly different path. In my case, wanting to be an academic, but ending up doing something interesting, but not being an academic.
Hmm.
So there's all these detours. Yeah.
Right. And ma'am,
So,
if you were to share with us any one learning from the Columbia disaster, so what that learning would be,
mhm.
like any couple of learnings if you would like to share.
The learning is, I think, to always be very conscious of safety, to also, whenever somebody brings up a concern, try to give it full due diligence, create a culture where people are emboldened to bring up these concerns so that they don't just think it, but they say, oh, if I say this, it might disrupt the schedule and there may be negative consequences for me to do that. So you need a culture where people are willing to speak up, because they're not going to be, there's not going to be something retaliatory for them raising these issues. So a lot of that is there. And then, of course, in mission management, that people should say, yes, schedule, yes, deliverables, yes, but if there is a major safety issue, safety is the most important thing, especially when it comes to human spaceflight. I mean, even in unmanned spaceflight, there's the expense and the schedule and all that, but here you also have lives at stake. So it makes the thing even bigger. Because those are the two major important things, right? Loss of vehicle, loss of life, loss of crew. So.
Understood. And ma'am, I would also like you to elaborate a little bit on the culture thing that you mentioned. So how do you think such a culture can be cultivated and developed? And why do organizations fail to develop such a culture where anybody can raise their concerns or put forward their point?
I think a lot of it is, in Boeing, we are encouraged to speak up, and I have never felt intimidated to voice concerns. And so I think we have that culture. We have a good culture, I would say, in my team and group. And I think it comes from leadership, encouraging people to speak up. Which is something we have a lot of. We frequently have these video training sessions encouraging people to speak up. And then actually, acting on suggestions or safety concerns that are brought up, because if you keep raising an issue, but it's not addressed or implemented, then that is going to demoralize the person working on the problem. So not only do you have to encourage them, but act upon the issues that they raise so that they feel, yes, I made a difference. What I said made a difference. It made the process better. It made the process safer. It prevented accidents, that kind of a thing.
Got it. Okay, ma'am. So
because we all like to feel that we have contributed in some kind of a meaningful way. So if we raise an issue, we want to see something tangible and positive come out of it. And so I think that is the way senior leaders can inculcate that behavior.
Got it. So, ma'am, any last pieces of advice for younger folks who are currently either studying in BITS or just graduated, and they want to work in the space industry or any industry in general? Because you have you have more than decades of experience. So anything you would like to give as insights or advice to the younger people here?
In terms of advice, I would just say something that I have learned myself, which is one of the things I said is to have a goal and to stay focused on it. I will come back to that. I think that is important. But periodically, what you need to do also is you need to stand back and reevaluate. What I mean is, suppose you have put X dollars in the stock market and it's not going anywhere. The stock is just going down, down, down. And so then you shouldn't sort of say, oh, I'm focused on this goal and I'm going to make this work. So sometimes you need to step back and say, what's going on here? Am I focused on the right thing? Am I doing all the things I need to do? Or am I doing the wrong thing? Or am I, what I mean is, the way I look at it, looking at something from 30 feet or 3 feet, and then looking at it from 30,000 feet. You sort of need to keep, maybe because I'm in the aircraft industry, that's the way I look at it. There's the 3-foot view and then there's the 30,000-foot view. And you need to be able to look at both sides to keep yourself on track. And sometimes you may need to reevaluate or modify your goals, is what I'm trying to say. I'm not saying because of that you give up and, perseverance is important, but don't get into a sort of a tunnel vision mode. Like, I have to get here. When it's not working, just stand back and reevaluate is something I would suggest. Yeah, that's something that tried to learn in my life.
This is very fascinating, ma'am. Could you elaborate on, so for example, let's say if I'm doing a particular thing and that is not working, and I reevaluate that and I found that there is an issue because of which it was not working, and I resolved that thing and it started working. But in many cases, it might happen that the person is not even able to figure out what the issue has been. So in that case, how to identify if we need to quit that thing because it's not working, or we need to be more persistent and try to figure something out? How do you basically figure out whether it's time to quit or to persevere?
Well, for this, I will go back to something my mentor taught me. And he always said, good decisions come from experience. Okay. And experience always comes from bad decisions. So I don't think there is a magic secret sauce or recipe to that. I think you just have to live life. There's no other way around it. You have to live it and sort of figure things out as you go along. So reflect, reevaluate, have a sense of self-awareness and social awareness. And I think all these things help in addition to all your technical skills. Yeah.
Got it. That was a really amazing point, ma'am. I will take it with me that good decisions come from experience and experience comes from bad experience. This is amazing.
Well, that's something my mentor taught me. I didn't come up with it.
Okay, ma'am. So with this, we come to the end of this podcast. Thank you so very much for giving your time to us. I know it must have been very hectic for you, and still it's really an honor and a pleasure to have you on the podcast. So thanks a lot for giving your time.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure doing this and, connecting with BITSians. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.